In September of 1989, I was in the ninth grade. I had just started the ninth grade, just started a new school year, and maybe some of you remember what was going on weather-wise, but a massive hurricane came on shore in Charleston, South Carolina. It was Hurricane Hugo, and because of how some fronts were stacked, as it came in at Charleston, these other fronts just kind of shot it straight north, so that when it came to Charlotte, where we lived, it was still a Category 1 hurricane. And I remember waking up in the middle of the night, and I mean, it was crazy scary. I mean, I thought the windows were going to blow out of my bedroom window, just the glass bust. And so, anyway, lots and lots and lots and lots of trees were down everywhere. It looked like bombs had gone off across the city, and it was pretty clear we're going to be out of power, and we're going to be out of power for a while. And as that's the case, you're bracing for how long this is going to be, and you think there's going to be some bases that we need to cover. And at our house, there was a refrigerator in the house, but then there was a refrigerator and a stand-up freezer out in the garage. And somehow we'd found out that there was a place in Charlotte that had blocks of dry ice. And so the thought was, well, maybe that'll save some of this stuff so that we don't lose everything that's in the freezer or the refrigerator. And so we went to this place, and I remember standing in this long line with my mom. And also, I remember there was a lady in front of me. Apparently, she didn't have water or something because she really needed to shave. And her beard was, that was free. Anyway. Also true. Anyway, so we're standing in line. Finally, we leave with a couple of like 12 by 12 blocks of dry ice. And they're wrapped in brown paper. We get those home, and I had heard people talk before about how cold it is, and they would say that you don't want to touch dry ice because you could burn yourself with it. I thought, well, that sounds kind of strange. And so, anyway, what I needed to do, though, we wanted to cut this in half, this big block, so that we could put it in like the top part of the freezer and then the refrigerator, so we could maximize some of the cold that was coming off of this. And I get this handsaw, and I'm going to cut through it. But having heard warnings about this, I used some gloves, and I saw through this thing. But I'm also a dumb boy, and I'm in the ninth grade, and so I also think, I'm going to take these gloves off. I'm going to touch it. So I take the gloves off, and I touch it. And at that point, I kind of understood what people said when they said it would burn you. But it doesn't actually burn you. I looked up the other day, what's the temperature of dry ice? It's minus 109 degrees Fahrenheit. So if you think that you can burn at minus 109 degrees Fahrenheit, something you missed a day or two in school. You can't actually be burned by something that is actually that cold. Now here's the thing, as you touch that, the effect as it is destroying that tissue, when you touch it, it feels like being burned, but you're not actually being burned. What it feels like is not what the actual reality is. Sometimes what we feel is not how things actually are. We're thinking, and we have been for weeks, working through the little book of Lamentations about the human experience of grief and the various expressions and experiences of loss that we go through. And one of the things that is true, and pick your loss, whatever it is. If it's the loss of a loved one, it's the loss of a relationship, it's the loss of job, it's the loss of financial security, maybe the loss of hair, I don't know. Pick whatever it is your loss is. One of the things that you can and often will experience as you experience that is a feeling of isolation. As you are going through whatever your loss is, you may very well be puzzled because you look around and like inside, it feels like the world has stopped, and you're puzzled because everybody else is going about a normal routine, and in your mind you're puzzled because it feels like the world has stopped. What I'm going through is so big, it is so seismic, what I am experiencing, but everything is going on around me so normal, and that feels so isolating. But what I said just a moment ago rings true, and that is that oftentimes how things actually feel is different than how they actually are. And what I want you to understand and get settled square in your mind and heart is this. If you have a personal relationship with God, If you know the Lord in a real and a personal way, even in the face of grief and loss, whatever the source of that is, even though it feels like you're isolated, you never actually are. Grief makes you feel isolated, but how do I know that I actually am not? We're going to see the answer to that question today in Lamentations chapter 3. If you would look with me in your Bibles there today. Lamentations chapter 3. If you have trouble finding that, this is 2 weeks in a row where I meant to mark it and I didn't. But Lamentations chapter 3, it's right after Jeremiah. Jeremiah, and then goes Lamentations. Look with me starting in verse 22. There, we believe this to be Jeremiah writing here, and he says this: "Because of the Lord's faithful love, we do not perish, for His mercies never end. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. I say, the Lord is my portion, therefore I will put my hope in Him." If you are a follower of Jesus, understand that you are not immune from the experiences of loss and the grief that comes from it. But when you are going through that, you are likely to feel in some degree or another these feelings of isolation. But what I want you to understand is that if you have a personal relationship with God, that's not a valid feeling. That's not how things actually are. How do we know that? Based on what we see here. I believe God used Jeremiah to communicate this: "My experiences of grief never separate me from God's love." My experiences of grief never separates me from God's love. So that we're all on the same page, let's get back in our minds what's going on. Or if you're new to this series or new to this section of the Bible, you may not be aware of what's going on. But you have the people of God that are in what's known as, at this point, the southern kingdom of Judah. And the capital is the city of Jerusalem. And these are the people of God. These are the people that God has shared His word with, that He has raised up prophets, and He's raised up judges, and then eventually kings that have led them. And the plan is that He's going to use them to be a light to the nations of the world. And it's going to be through them that He's going to demonstrate who He is and what He can do in the life of a person, inviting people to come into relationship with Him. And He wanted to use His people to be a difference that people could look at, and other peoples and nations would look and say, there are things that are actually different about them. Why is that? What is that? And that they could be a light to the nations. The problem is they were completely different than us. I mean, because you just warn us one time and we just snap to attention, right? And everything God says, we absolutely do, right? Unfortunately, we don't. And unfortunately, that's also nothing new. And they decided, you know what? We can do that. We can do it later. We can do that, or we cannot do it at all. We just kind of want to do our own thing. And unfortunately, since sin has come into the world, even among those who know better, consistently and regularly and repeatedly, what we decide is, I'm just going to kind of do my own thing. And that's what they did. And God sent prophet after prophet to warn them, to say, listen, I know what's going on. I mean, there's no secret about how you're following other gods, how the injustice is rampant, how it is that that sexual immorality is rampant. You're operating just like people that don't know me. You're operating like people that are not connected with me. I expect you to be different, and I'm warning you, if things do not change, some things are going to change. It's like any parent does with a child that is acting in disobedience. You warn, and then consequences come. They've been hearing for generations that consequences are going to come, but now the warnings have become reality. And the reality is taken shape in the form of the Babylonians coming in, this enemy army, these pagan people coming in, and they tear up everything. And so the temple is in ruins. Everything that is of value, whether it is person or a material treasure, they've carted off. Stacks of people are dead. Fields are burned. Harvests are destroyed. And this place looks like a dump. And they are in absolute misery because everything that has been so normal is now no longer normal. And they are a laughingstock among the nations. And this people that had once represented strength and prosperity, now they just look like desolation. And things are really, really bad. And what you read in this book of Laments, in Lamentations, is Jeremiah seeing and reviewing all of these losses. And as they are experiencing these losses, let me just remind you of this. I am not suggesting, and the hint is, the implication is that not every loss you experience in your life is because of your sin. I don't want you to leave here today, if you're watching, I don't want you to watch and think, well, if something bad happens to me, that's God just kind of sticking it to me, that He's sending His own personal lightning bolt to me because of my wayward actions. I'm not suggesting that. What I am saying is this, that you and I are going to experience grief and loss for a variety of reasons. One of which, chief among them, is this. We operate in a broken world where sin has affected everything. I mean, it's because of sin's existence in the world that we wear out. That some of you got up this morning and your knees hurt really bad and you hobbled out of the bed this morning, or that you had to get some hearing aids in before you could hear and some glasses on before you could see. Our bodies are wearing out because of sin's presence in the world. There are tragedies like earthquakes and hurricanes and famines and all of these things because our world, the totality of it, everything that we experienced has been broken and affected because of sin. There's also sin that operates in terms of the choices that other people make. And people that make choices, even whether they know God or whether they don't, making regretful, painful, out-of-bounds decisions and choices, those choices many times may affect us as an innocent victim. It's not my sin that I'm experiencing consequences for, it's their sin. But there still remains this category that God is not indifferent to the choices that we make. He's not indifferent to the choices that I make. And there are instances where I may get out of bounds and God may work to get my attention through adverse circumstances, through adverse consequences, to get me back in line and back following Him. Now, the truth is this. You may not know as you are going through your particular loss which category it falls into. I mean, are you experiencing this loss because the world's broken? Maybe. Is it because there's some choice that has been made by you or someone else? Maybe. You may not know in the moment. In fact, this side of heaven, you may not know. But the one thing that you do know is that when you are experiencing loss and the grief that comes with it, you know this: it stinks. I mean, we don't go to the funeral home because we're just bored and we just want to say, oh, ding dong, the witch is dead, right? We're not happy about losing people that matter to us. We're not happy when the company says that we're downsizing and your position is gone. We're not happy when the doctor says, I'm sorry, we have found this spot on this scan. We're not happy about any of these losses. We know that they stink. We may not know from whence they have come. We just know that they are terrible. Now, as you think through this, keep in mind, we are not talking about people in general. We are thinking specifically today about the experience of loss among the people of God, people that are in relationship with Him. But one of the things that you may experience as you go through that is this. This is terrible. I can't stop crying. I can't sleep at night. My heart is broken. My body aches. I mean, and those of you that are further down the road than I am, you've probably got multiplied experiences that you can substitute in and say, hey, this was my loss, this was my experience of grief, and as you're going through it, it felt so bad, it felt so tragic. And again, you look at the world around you and nothing has stopped, but on the inside, it feels like everything has stopped. This is colossal, this is earth-shattering, this is terrible, this is so awful, and it may very well lead you to think, wait a minute, God, where are you in this? Do I not matter to you? I mean, everybody around me seems to be just living life like normal. They don't seem to care. And I continue to go through this, and you're not changing it. Hey, do you even care? It may lead you to experience these feelings of isolation, not simply from others, but even from God. But let me remind you again of what God used Jeremiah to say. Because of the Lord's faithful love. Now that word faithful has ramifications on two levels. He's describing faithful in the sense that it keeps going. That there's not a pause button. That there's not a stop button. That it's not a fountain that runs dry. God doesn't get tired of me. God doesn't get tired of you. He began loving you, and He's never stopped loving you. You started mattering to Him, and you've not stopped mattering to Him. And so His love for you is faithful in the sense that it continues. But this is a word that also conveys the idea of covenant relationship. Again, we're talking about the experience of grief and loss, not just from any aimless person, but specifically those that are in relationship with God. And if that's true of you, God's love for you is non-ending in the sense that there's not pressing the pause or the stop button, but it's also that it's faithful in the sense that He is committed to you, that He remains in relationship with you. And while it may feel like you are completely isolated, just as the feeling of touching dry ice, it feels like I'm being burned. I'm not actually being burned. It may feel like that I'm isolated from God, that He doesn't love me, but I'm telling you, your feelings are betraying you. You've got to know that your experience of grief, whenever it has occurred in the past, if it's going on right now, if it starts this week, if it starts next month, it has never, ever, and will never, ever separate you from God's love for you. Your experience of grief never separates you from God's love. Now, tomorrow is Valentine's Day, and I remember as a kid in elementary school, I looked forward to that. Not because I liked anybody or because anybody liked me. That was a fun day in school, at least in elementary classes. And typically what would happen is that the day before, or maybe earlier in the day, you'd be doing a craft, and the craft was going to be to make some sort of like envelope, some sort of letter carrier that you would wind up taping on the front of your desk, and you'd write your name on it, you'd put hearts, you'd put whatever you want, you'd draw on it, markers, crayons, whatever, and then you would tape that on the front of your desk. And then on Valentine's Day, or the day that your class was going to observe it as close to Valentine's Day, there'd be a particular time during the day where everybody would go around and they would have gone to the store. We always went to Kmart and got our little box of Valentine's cards, and there'd be enough to do a whole class worth. And you would have written these notes out, and you put them in everybody's envelope or in their little thing on their desk. And it was silly. It didn't make a whole lot of difference, but it was a lot of fun. It was something I looked forward to. Maybe something that you enjoyed as well. Maybe you did it in Sunday school today. I don't know. Anyway, it was interesting, though, for me, that whole process of getting my cards together, because my mom would take me, it seemed like it was always Kmart. It's hard to believe, again, that they're gone now, but they were so big. But you'd go to Kmart, and there would be all these different cartoon-type character things. And so there would be like a Garfield, there might be a Transformers set or a G.I. Joe set of Valentine's cards, and there's like 30 of them in there. And so I picked the one that I want, and so I get home, and I'd have a list of the people in my class, and I wouldn't just start writing names on them and sealing them. I'd look at those cards, because some of those cards said some stuff I didn't want them to say. I wouldn't want to send one to OL that says, "Would you be my Valentine?" Right? And so honestly, those types of cards, most of the time, I would just throw those out. I didn't want to send that card because that conveyed the wrong message. I just wanted to say, "Happy Valentine's Day." Nothing more, nothing less. Because if I sent that would be conveying my feelings, potentially. Will you be my Valentine? That suggests, hey, Michael may like you. Well, that's logical, isn't it? And it is logical because we understand this. Our feelings translate themselves into actions, don't they? They translate themselves into verbal expressions. They translate themselves into demonstrable behaviors of how we talk, how we act, the purchase of gifts or the refusal to give. All of how it is that I feel demonstrates itself in those actions. And there's a sense in which we're operating under this notion: if you love me, you'll show me. If you love me, prove it. And I think many times what we do is we translate that and direct that to God and say, as I'm going through my loss and my grief, this feels so terrible, my heart is so broken, my tears are so numerous and so great and so real, you must not love me. I feel so isolated, and I'm telling you, if you ever, as a child of God, feel that way, your feelings are betraying you. That is not a valid feeling, because your experience of grief never, ever, ever separates you from God's love. I don't mean to be trite in this, but when you are going through loss and grief, even of the highest magnitude, if you're a follower of Jesus, even if that loss is coming because God is seeking to get your attention, He is, even in that, proving His love for you because He says it is faithful, which is to say it is continuing, and then that His mercies, they don't end. They don't end. If I could put it another way, the fact that it is not worse than it is, and that sounds trite, but I don't mean it to be that way, but it's the truth. The fact that it is not worse than it is suggests that God is still got His foot on the throttle, and He is controlling this because He loves you. And even the greatest depths of grief and loss that you can experience, absolutely, it could be worse, but it's not for you because His love for you is faithful. It hasn't stopped. He hasn't pressed the pause button. He hasn't gotten tired of you. In fact, there are mercies that are new for you today, as there were yesterday, as there will be tomorrow. You are still connected. You may feel isolated, but you are still connected because His love for you has never actually stopped. You haven't gotten separated from His love. But there's a second reason that my feelings may betray me. That while grief may make me feel isolated, I'm actually not isolated from God because my experience of grief is never separated from hope. My experience of grief is never separated from hope. Hope is an interesting thing, isn't it? In fact, if you were writing a dictionary, if you had to define hope, you might struggle with the words to actually quantify the meaning of it. We know it when we feel it. We kind of know it when we see it. But what exactly is it? I think in general, hope is rooted in a sense of optimism of some sort, that somehow, in some way, things are going to be better. So what I'm experiencing now, at some point in the future, near or distant, things are going to be different, but not just different, somehow better. And so we hope for all kinds of things. I hope I may feel better tomorrow. I hope I may get that promotion. I hope that person will go to prom with me. We hope for a whole stack of things. But if you were Jeremiah or someone else walking the pitiful streets of Jerusalem, you've got to be feeling awfully low. When you see that there's nothing to eat, that people are starving, when you see that there are stacks of lifeless bodies on the street, one of the things that you are looking for is not simply something to eat. You are looking for hope, aren't you? That somehow, in some way, you can take confidence. It's not going to be like this forever. At some point, the sun's going to come out again. At some point, things are going to be getting better. In general, what you are experiencing with the desire for hope is that the difficulty of the moment will at some point cease and things will at some point get better. Now, it's certain none of us in this room, none of you that's watching have ever experienced exactly what Jeremiah did. We haven't. And hopefully we never experience anything exactly like that. But you have and you will experience loss in one form or another. And as you experience it, there is going to be this longing for hope that in the days to come, in the weeks to come, in the months to come, the years to come, that it's not going to be like this forever. That somehow, some way, the sun's going to come out. Somehow, some way, things are going to get better. That's how hope works, and we are all pursuing it in its various forms. Now, the reality, though, is this: not all pursuit of hope is reasonable. Not all pursuing of hope is reasonable. Let me give you an example. You could leave here today and go to a gas station somewhere and go inside and say, I want to buy a lottery ticket. All right? I don't know how much a lottery ticket costs. Is it $1? I don't know what it is. Go ahead and tell me so we can see who's doing it. Anyway. Anyway, so if you go and you buy a lottery ticket. If you buy a lottery ticket, why would anybody buy a lottery ticket? It's because of hope, isn't it? I mean, you hope that you're going to win. I mean, you've seen that sign out on the interstate that says, a jackpot of $350 million. And you hope that maybe they would draw your number and that would be your money. That's why anybody would buy a lottery ticket. But can we just be honest and say that that's not a reasonable hope? It's really not. That's why states start lotteries, right? Because you're not going to win. You're just not. Do you know why? And none of you have won this morning. You know why? Because you're here, right? You may say, I'm going to buy this because I hope to win. And technically and mathematically, there is a possibility, but that possibility is this big. It's this big. What is effectively certain is that you're not going to win. And so while you may say, I hope I'm going to win, in truth, if we just want to be honest, that's not a reasonable hope, is it? It's like a stab in the dark. Maybe, just grasping at straws. And it is possible as a follower of God that as you are going through your darkest days, it's the loss of a loved one, it's the loss of health, it's the loss of financial security, it's the loss of whatever it is, that you can be feeling so isolated and so gloomy and so blue and so down and so separated, it seems, from everybody, and even looking towards heaven and feel so isolated and just say, well, I hope it's going to be better at some point. And many could look at you and say, well, that's just kind of wishful thinking. That's just wistful optimism. It's not based in reality. Look around you. Somebody could have said to Jeremiah, look around you. Do you not see these burned fields? Do you not see that torn down temple? Do you not see these empty shelves? Do you not see these lifeless bodies? Don't you see all of this? I hope it's going to be better. That's wishful thinking. But pay attention to what he says. I say, verse 24, the Lord is my portion, therefore I will do what? I will put my hope in Him. The word translated there as portion is well translated, and it means portion or share. For example, if you said, if there was a tray of brownies that was sitting there, I may say, hey, make sure you save me a couple of them, but save the corners, right? And so if I've kind of staked those off, if I've laid claim to those, you could say, well, that's Michael's portion. That's his share. I'm staking my claim. I'm saying that's mine. I'm saying that's my portion. And Jeremiah is saying, I have hope. And I have hope for a reason. Because he says, the Lord is my portion. The Lord is my share. He doesn't say, I have hope because there's still money in a savings account, because there are friends, because there are other places to go, because there's anything other than this. He's mine. The God of the universe is my God. And it's because of that I've got hope. That as bad as it is right now, I don't know when, I don't know how, and I don't know in what way, but I know it's not going to be like this forever because He's mine. I really do wonder sincerely where, especially in the face of death, people outside of a relationship with God find any hope. I really do. I mean, just last Saturday, we had Nikki Bruce's funeral here in this room. And one of the great comforts I have, as with so many funerals I've been able to do, is to offer words of courage, words of comfort and encouragement to the family to say, hey, you have the opportunity of being able to see her again. And it's because she was the Lord's and the Lord was hers. Outside of Jesus, what do people say? What hope is there to be found? What encouragement is there to be found? Where do you get hope? I hope I've been good enough. I hope I've done enough kind things. Let me see if I can put this together to say very simply this. As you experience loss in whatever form it comes, and whatever grief comes along with it, whether it's because of the broken world that we're operating in, because of the choices that others make, or maybe it's even because of your sin and God is trying to get your attention, even though you may feel particularly isolated, you're not hopeless when He is yours. You have not been separated from hope. And it's not wishful thinking. It's not aimless promise. It is reasonable and it's grounded because He is yours. Thomas Chisholm was born in a log cabin in Franklin, Kentucky in 1866. Some of you might have gone to school with him, but kept him in the nursery. But he was born in a little meager log cabin in 1866 in Kentucky. He never finished or had a high school degree, didn't finish college, but was able to become a school teacher. Became a school teacher at 16. Later, he felt God's call in his life and began to serve as a minister, but had some health problems and had to just rest and recuperate and just tried to get to better health for a while. And during that time of recuperation, he wound up moving to New Jersey and sold insurance policies for a season of time. Now, everybody has a hobby that they enjoy, and for him, one of the things that he enjoyed was writing poetry. And he would save the stuff that he had written, and in 1923, he sent to a friend of his by the name of William Runyon a collection that he had put together of some of the poems that he had written. And there was one of them that just kind of struck Runyon. And Runyon was connected with Moody Bible Institute and worked for a hymnal publishing company. And as he was leafing through these poems, he was just taken by the words of one of them that became what we sang just a moment ago, that hymn that we know as Great is Thy Faithfulness. Summer and winter and springtime and harvest, pardon for sin and a peace that endureth, all of those things demonstrating and rooted not only in this passage, but rooted in the experience of God providing for, taking care of, not being isolated. You know, it's interesting to me, there are some hymns and some great hymns that have moving, wonderfully moving stories. I think, for example, the hymn It Is Well has one of the most moving stories behind it. If you haven't heard that, I'll be glad to share that with you at some point. But Great is Thy Faithfulness really just kind of doesn't. It's a guy that had some trouble in his life, and he liked to write poetry. And a friend of his happened to be struck by one of them and set it to music, and we've been singing it ever since. There's no great earth-shattering moment, no great tragedy or loss that motivated it. It was just having read this and then just kind of prompted to write. And at first I kind of thought, well, that stinks. I wish there was a great story to be able to tell with the writing of that hymn. But then I thought, you know what? It actually stands to reason that the greatest place to learn the faithfulness of God is not in tragedy, but in ordinary life. The regular routine of living. Learning it today and yesterday and tomorrow, so that I have learned of His faithfulness to me before the tragedy comes. So that when it does come, and it will, I will know and I will be certain. It may feel isolating, but I am not. Will you bow your heads with me?